welcome back to another episode of Trident Talks. I'm your host, Gareth Davies, and I help early and growth stage cybersecurity vendors build their go-to-market team. Today, I'm joined by Joshua Reynolds, CEO and founder of Invoke RE. Josh, do you want to start with your background and just kind of introduce yourself and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So thanks so much for having me, first of all. So just for a little bit of background, I've been in the industry for about 12 years now, and I started out by doing some quality assurance and web application penetration testing when I was in college. That later transferred into doing quality assurance for some early EDR products at what was SourceFire at the time. So for those of you who have been in the industry for a while, you might remember Snort, and that SourceFire was acquired by Cisco. And then when I went over to Cisco, I ended up doing malware research full time. So testing those security products ended up transforming into doing malware research. And I ended up doing what is now called detection engineering, which wasn't really a thing at the time, but for the product lines at Cisco. So that was that early EDR product and sandboxing product. And then after I was there for about 5 years, I ended up joining CrowdStrike, where I did threat intelligence for 6.5 years. And then more recently, I founded Invoke RE, which I'm the founder of.
Nice. So you've had a pretty mixed bag career, right? Started off with a pen tester, then went into that defense world, and now you're starting your own thing. So it's a pretty varied background, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
What does Invoke RE do, and what are the problems are you trying to solve?
Yeah, so we're a Canadian cybersecurity startup. We do anything related to reverse engineering, malware analysis, and blue team oriented practices. So those are our core focus areas. We are currently doing a ton of training. So we have online on-demand training offerings that provide introductions to doing binary malware analysis, which is also a fairly niche area, but it's an area that we wanted to expand upon because there wasn't really a lot of good on-demand service offerings. And then we do service offerings for all of those areas. So we have consulting services that we provide reverse engineering and malware analysis for.
Okay, so is your approach different, or does your approach differ from traditional malware analysis or reverse engineering teams, or is there anything within what you're doing at Invoke RE now that might be different to what other vendors are doing?
Yeah, so on the training side, the reason that I wanted to look at training as a piece to look at and improve upon from the current industry practices is I've done a ton of training myself. Like I went to a ton of conferences, took trainings, and they're really good content, but one, they're very expensive. So you have to go to a location, have a teacher there, go through the content within usually 2 to 3 days, and then it's over. There's some teachers that have discords and chat communities after the fact, but more often than not, you're paying thousands of dollars up front. You're doing it within a small amount of time, and then after that, you're kind of on your own. So what I wanted to look at is doing an on-demand service, which is what we have, where you can go at your own pace. You can talk to me directly on our Discord community, email, etc. And then you can work with others who are currently doing the course at their own pace in order to get assistance as well. So that was a large differentiator for us, is trying to get a that on-demand piece in place from an accessible price point. So it is quite a bit more affordable than most trainings in the industry right now. So that's definitely a big differentiator for us. And then on the services side, I've been in the industry for quite some time. I've been working on bleeding edge techniques myself for quite some time. So we definitely bring the experience to the table that a lot of others don't have in the industry with respect to reverse engineering and malware analysis. And I've also been integrating a number of, modern AI workflows into my day-to-day work in order to improve upon delivery and the efficiency in doing that. And that's especially important with having such a small team. So we're only 2 people right now. So
Okay, cool. And who are you targeting then? Who's your ideal customer profile? I know obviously further down the line you're going to be more, malware focused, but currently where you are at the minute, you are very much a training platform, right?
Yeah, currently the majority of the bread and butter is the training platform in addition to the service offerings, but we're targeting both individuals and enterprises. So we've been working with both of those areas of customer bases. The price point has definitely enabled a lot more individuals to purchase the training, which has been nice. It's obviously very good working with people who are completely new to the industry or who do not have enterprise budgets for purchasing the training. But in addition to that, we're also very happy to work with enterprises, and we've been doing that as well.
Cool. So if we talk about the field itself and how it's evolving malware analysis, because I would say that malware analysis today maybe looks a little bit different to what it did maybe 5, 10 years ago, right? So what are you seeing from what's the major advancements that you've seen in malware analysis recently?
So over the past probably 10 years or so, we've had these automated analysis pipelines
Hmm.
that usually are made up of some form of static analysis, which is basically analyzing the files at rest, or
Hmm.
dynamic analysis, which is analyzing the malware as it executes in memory. And there's a number of those commercial automation platforms that are available. There's open source solutions that will do that as well. You can think of the dynamic solutions being things like sandboxes. So you'll submit a file to a sandbox, it will execute within the sandbox, and then it'll have a number of hooks and things in place to monitor the file and then give
Hmm.
you a report. So that's all well and good. That's kind of been chugging along in its own pace. I've had a number of friends like Unpack Me, for example, OA Labs, my friends over there, who have been taking a very different approach. So a lot of the times you'll have these pieces of malware that are wrapped in outer layers that are highly obfuscated and difficult to detect for antivirus and EDR solutions. So they've been taking an approach of removing that wrapping in order to reveal the malware underneath. So there's been some cool innovations in those areas of the space. But more recently, obviously, I'm sure we're going to talk about it quite a bit here, is the integration of AI into those analysis pipelines. So more often than not, you'll have these pieces of malware code that can be interpreted by these large language models because they are trained to interpret code well, because they're trained to produce code. So they're like, I'm sure you've seen Cursor and all these other things that are really good at producing or pretty good at producing programming code. And because of that, they're actually quite good at interpreting it, but only when they're in kind of that de-obfuscated form. So that's probably the most recent innovation.
And are security teams still facing the same challenges today as they were maybe 5 years ago?
No, I would say they're probably facing more rapid deployment of these techniques. So
Mhm.
you'll see kind of time to entry to objectives decreasing drastically. So because of that, you've needed these EDR solutions or visibility solutions in environments that allow them to detect and respond in a very rapid manner. Whereas I would say probably 5, 10 years ago, that wasn't really the case. You had kind of classic antivirus in a lot of these environments. You didn't have a lot of automation in place on the red team or the offensive side.
Mhm.
But what we've probably seen in the past 5 years, especially, is kind of that time window shrinking, and therefore the time to respond needing to be like not instantaneous, but as fast as possible in order to contain these situations. And that's really hard for, like the SMB side of things because they can't afford all of these super fancy bells and whistles. But I think there is some pretty good open source solutions for some of those organizations, et cetera. But yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest change that security orgs I've seen in the past 5 years or so.
And I think you touched on it there, right? But more from an offensive perspective, like how automation and new tooling are kind of reshaping the discipline. So, like, is there a specific tool or automation trend that's changed how you've seen like large enterprise teams work? Or
Yeah, like so from I think probably from the detection and response side, it's been, having endpoint detection and response on the endpoints. It's having these security SaaS solution requirements in the cloud. So you'll have like single sign-on services, zero trust, all of these things in place that need to be monitored and ensured that there isn't a single point of failure, or if there is, you can detect and respond to that or kill the session.
yeah.
So yeah, I would say like there's not a single tool that's really been a solution for all of these different problems, but there's definitely a new set of problems that have come into play through a lot of these companies moving to cloud platforms, a lot of these companies moving to SaaS platforms solely, or having not like having cloud workloads, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah,
So
sorry, I know that was kind of long-winded, but
it's okay, don't worry.
it's
But
complicated. Yeah.
I suppose as tech and innovation have progressed to where we are now, does an effective reverse engineering workflow today still look like it did 5, 10 years ago?
I would say there's a lot more automation pieces in place. So I would say the majority of my time now is spent writing code to reverse engineer code. And that might sound kind of peculiar, but
Yeah.
more often than not, you'll have these reverse engineering platforms. So, like for example, I use one called Binary Ninja, and it has a really good API that allows me to interface with the reverse engineering database
Mhm.
using Python. And then so usually more often than not, I'll need to write code to either deobfuscate or find pieces of information that I need in the database in a rapid fashion in order to speed up my reverse engineering process. So I would say that's probably the biggest piece that's changed from probably like when I started, which was solely manual work, is right now I'm writing a lot of code to analyze code rather than before, which was kind of, manually clicking through the user interface and going through and doing everything manually.
Okay, and you've published quite a bit of research as well, right, on scavenger malware through NPM and PyPI packages, right? What were
Yes.
unique about those cases in particular?
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting. Back in July, we saw a large number of popular NPM packages that were compromised. So what was unique about these campaigns was they were directly targeting the maintainers and developers of these large scale NPM packages.
Mhm.
So more often than not, you have enterprise organizations that are making use of these third party packages in their development environments. And these
Mhm.
were developer focused, like linters and stuff like that, that were helping with developers write code. And what was unique about that is you have these third parties that are maintaining these projects, but you don't necessarily have security precautions in place for those third parties because sometimes they're volunteers, sometimes they're just doing this in their spare time when they have a day-to-day programming job, et cetera. So it's really hard for those folks to have the same security precautions that you would have in your enterprise environment. So what these guys did is basically they phished these npm maintainers, and then they got access to their npm account, and then they started publishing these npm packages that would execute Windows malware. So that was pretty interesting in that we hadn't seen the developers being targeted in the past in that same way, shape, or form. And then they moved on to from npm to PyPy as well. So they were targeting some popular PyPy packages to basically do the exact same thing. And then what was interesting is because they were targeting developers with those linter projects, those developers also had npm tokens that could be stolen on their machines. So then they're just trying to get more and more access to these npm tokens so that they can just continue to proliferate and do these supply chain attacks and get more and more access. So that was probably the most unique aspect about those particular attacks.
And what lessons can teams take from those supply chain compromises?
Yeah, so there's a number of companies that are popping up now for maintaining trusted repositories for these dependencies. So
Mhm.
obviously it's not always realistic that you're going to re-implement all of these projects yourself or fork all of these projects yourself just because not everybody has the time to do that. And it
Sure.
still is good to leverage open source repositories. So there is third parties that are establishing trusted repositories for that. But outside of that, you can establish cooldown periods. So you can do, like N-1 updates for these packages if they're non like security critical updates. Basically ensuring that if there's any security related events that you're not a part of that and then seeing that happen in the wild. Fortunately, most folks can detect these more often than not, so that is one approach. You can also pin these packages to a specific hash or a specific version, and then update manually accordingly. Like if you really don't need the latest and greatest features of a package, then you can really just pin it to a specific version,
Mhm.
and then detection, response, multi-factor authentication, doing all like this, the in security in-depth practices that you would have within a typical organization is also extremely important.
Okay, cool. I suppose that brings us nicely to the education side of what you're building, right? So, what inspired you to embed a strong education component into what you're doing? Was there like a particular like pain moment or a pinch moment where you thought, okay, this is something I need to bring to the market?
Yeah, I think there was a number of different factors, those things that I mentioned earlier in terms of affordability, accessibility, et cetera.
Mhm.
The other side of that is that there wasn't really a good set of trainings in the industry for a introduction to malware binary triage. So the binary component is the what I would view as being the more difficult component of analyzing malware because you are analyzing CPU assembly instructions, you're doing all like more hardcore reverse engineering. So and I didn't really see a training aspect in the industry that addressed that. So that was a big focus for me. And then um, in terms of scale and impact, like philosophically, from a philosophical standpoint, is that the more people you have looking at these malware threats, the more things you're going to stop. So,
Mhm.
like, we have a Discord community where we talk about ongoing campaigns and things that need to be addressed. And, we have SOC analysts, incident response analysts, we have even red teamers, we have, everybody under the sun. And what's nice about having everybody in one area is that you have everybody talking about these attacks, you have everybody looking at these attacks, and then they can detect and respond to them based on their ability to analyze those attacks from the training. So what's really nice is that we don't have, technological scale currently, but we have people scale, and that being able to disseminate these skill sets allows organizations to be able to protect themselves against those threats.
I
Like,
suppose I don't know how to word this as a question, but like I assume it's very fulfilling, right? Where you've created this platform for people to learn and engage and try and better themselves. But I suppose you've also got this community of people that are trying to learn together, right? If you've got this Discord group that's going on and they're discussing certain events that are going on in the world and then trying to help each other really understand the importance of or maybe like, how this has happened or, how it could have been stopped. I suppose that's quite fulfilling, right?
yeah, it's super fulfilling. I've had especially folks who are early on in their careers, and they've reached out to me and been like, I've gotten a job because of your training, or
Yeah.
I've like I feel at home in your community, or
Yeah.
there's been a whole lot of different really lovely messages that I've gotten from folks and fantastic feedback and all these things. So it's very fulfilling.
Because it's very rare, like a level one SOC analyst, for example, will know how to do malware analysis, right? So to be able to open something up like this for them to be able to learn, almost, I suppose it would propel their career, right? It would take them to that kind of level two, maybe level three SOC analyst. That maybe, I've spoke with L3 analysts before that maybe know how to do malware analysis, but they admittedly they're not great at it, right? So it can only propel a career one way, right?
Yeah, exactly. For
So
sure.
why are hands-on labs and kind of real-world exercises so crucial to what you're doing?
So yeah, there's a few facets of that. Like I've basically taken my learning style and then put it into the materials. So I
Hmm.
like learning by doing, and I think a lot of folks like doing the same thing in order to take in content rather than just learning theory.
Hmm.
But not only that, because you're learning practical applications of the knowledge as you go, you're able to take those techniques and apply them to real world situations from day one. So that's what's really nice is, it can be the most basic technique that you've learned in a lab or in the course, but because you're using real world scenarios, you can apply those to real world situations out of the box rather than, being like, how can I apply this to a real world situation? And then the other aspect of that is reinforcement learning. So I'm not, an academic learning expert in terms of teaching this. I've never worked at a university, et cetera, et cetera. But
Hmm.
from my own learning style, being able to take theory, watching me doing practical demonstrations of these techniques, et cetera, and then doing those techniques yourself and then answering questions about them reinforces that learning. And we do that in a rapid fashion. So basically, every 10 to 12 minutes, you're doing something and then answering questions about it rather than,
Okay.
watching like 4 hour lectures and
Yeah.
then doing stuff after that. But
Let me ask you a question then, and this is a little bit more personal, but how do you personally stay sharp and like keep learning?
yeah, so through a lot of it's through the community engagement actually. So when we're talking about these modern attacks, if I see anything that's particularly interesting, like the scavenger stuff,
Hmm.
then I will, take time aside from the startup stuff and then analyze those myself. In addition to on the services side, where we provide bleeding edge professional services,
Mhm.
then I am able to look at real world scenarios that are occurring in environments. So through those two aspects, I'm still able to stay sharp, even though I'm not in the core parts of the industry anymore.
And if there's someone that's listening that is maybe aspires to be a reverse engineer, maybe looking for that first role into cyber to then progress to be a reverse engineer, what core skills do you think they should develop and any common, I suppose, pitfalls they need to avoid?
Yeah, so the best thing you can do is learn about core operating system internals. So, there's like the Windows system internals books. There's also the aspect of learning programming languages. So, if you are looking at code in order to understand it by reverse engineering, it is really important that you have some sort of programming background. So, from the reverse engineering platform perspective, they're showing you assembly instructions, which have pointers and structures and all of these things. So if you don't understand what those concepts are, then it's going to be near impossible to reverse engineer with them. So it's really important for you to understand things like C and C++ in order to have a solid understanding of those things. Understanding the network stack, being able to move up and down the network stack, being able to understand like what a TCP connection is, what a UDP connection is, all of those things are important as well.
Mhm.
Um, the common pitfalls that I usually see are folks kind of trying to skip those fundamentals and then go straight into the analysis. So
Yeah.
you can usually do that with things if you're analyzing like scripting languages or Python, et cetera. But once you get into the low level applications of reverse engineering, like with these binaries, it's really important to understand those fundamentals before jumping straight into it. Otherwise, you're just going to spin your wheels and get confused and frustrated. But if you put in the time up front, then it's definitely worth it.
And how much of an impact do you think AI will have in malware analysis?
So I think it really depends on how much better the large language models get in their
Mhm.
current form because they're effectively, guessing the next language token. It's essentially only effective at reverse engineering when it has the code that's being analyzed within its training set. So what I mean by that is if you have code that it is unfamiliar with, such as like a esoteric programming language or even an assembly programming language, then it is harder for the model to understand that and it'll hallucinate more and just make things up. So which will basically be really bad for, your response time, et cetera, et cetera. So when it is clear, concise code that is written in a popular programming language, it's usually quite good at understanding that. But when there's these obfuscation techniques, so what I mean by obfuscation is anything that might hinder the analysis, then it is very difficult for the large language models to understand that and act upon it. So there's tools that are always coming out that help with these. There is folks that are writing code to analyze code using the large language models, like I was describing earlier. But I think we're still super early on, and if large language models kind of stagnate at their current level, then I don't really think there's going to be anything like a major replacement of analysts. And even if there is, we're probably going to have tiers of folks that are just moving up one level and then analyzing the really hard stuff all the time instead of
Mhm.
spending a lot of time in the lower and the easier levels of analysis, and AI can handle those things and you can focus on harder things.
Like everything, right? It's going to enable a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
And allow you to focus on, like you said, the more hardcore stuff. It'll automate the things that are easy or maybe just time consuming, a little bit kind of repetitive that you're able to just kind of automate, but it'll just free up a lot of your time to be able to focus on a lot more serious stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Cool. So, moving back to kind of what you're doing in Invoke now, and obviously I know you're very early stages in kind of building this. Like, what's been your biggest lesson in founding and scaling so far?
So one that making your own company is very difficult.
Mm.
Won't sugarcoat it. When you're doing literally every aspect yourself, well, in addition to my business partner, it can be quite difficult. What is nice now is there's a lot of these business processes that can be automated, like when we're taking payment, we don't have to have our own payment processor, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely a lot of things now with making a modern company that is quite a lot more efficient. But probably the biggest takeaway that I've had thus far is having the security community in place. So that community aspect of the Invoke RE community side of things is probably the most important thing that I've noticed is that having not only folks to communicate and talk about with these things, but also having word of mouth. So, we don't have a huge marketing budget. So having word of mouth is probably the best thing that we can have for our growth and potential marketing. So that's probably been the best aspect for us is, having great training in place, community, having the possibility for word of mouth, getting involved in community engaged things like conferences. I just did a bunch of talks at B-sides events, which are community driven rather than commercialized. I think that's been probably the major takeaways thus far.
And that's where we met, right? We met at Black Hat, an event in Black Hat, right? So it's
Yeah,
always important to kind of be present in these type of events or community get-togethers because you never know who you're going to bump into and the connections you're going to make, right?
yeah, exactly.
Cool. What's I suppose finally from me, what's next on the roadmap or vision front? Like where do you want to be in 6, 12 months time?
Yeah, so we're currently working on an advanced training course. So taking kind of that introductory to intermediate back or all the way up to advanced now.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping to have that done within the new year. So everybody keep an eye out for that. And that will just cover, all the things I was just talking about, writing code, analyze code, figuring out how these advanced techniques work in order to analyze them, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm also hoping to, I won't go into too many different things because they're still very much in the works, but doing everything I can to make reverse engineering and malware analysis easier. So whether or not that means plugin development, I have a bunch of open source plugins, MCP servers that folks can use to interface with AI, et cetera. So I'm going to continue working on those aspects of the business as well and see what comes out of it, and hopefully we can continue to improve everybody's workflows.
Sounds busy and exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
Where can listeners learn more about kind of what you're doing and maybe follow your work?
Yeah. So if you check out invokere.com, so invokere.com, you can check out all of our social links. And we also have a YouTube channel where we upload, a bunch of live streams too. We have a Twitch channel where we have live streams. We have the Discord, like I mentioned. If you register on the training website, you can get access to the Discord. And then, yeah, we're on all the other social platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So
Cool. Well, Josh, I'll end the episode there. I really appreciate your time and joining us, and yeah, all the best in the coming months and trying to build, invoke, and scaling it. I look forward to seeing how far you can take it.
thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate it.